Hello. 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 Ja, servus.
Servus. Servus.
so ein schönes Spiel.
Tell me what you want. It's done.
fight against suffering. That's easy. That's the truth. The truth is the antidote to suffering. And the reason for that is because the truth puts reality behind you so that you can face the reality that's coming straight at you without becoming weak and degenerating and becoming resentful and wishing for the destruction of being. Because that's the final hell. The final hell is your soul wishing for the destruction of everything because it's too painful and you're too bitter. And that happens to people all the time.
Now, as a person who is someone who's extremely critical of ideologies, a lot of people would think it's a contradiction for you to embrace religion, because religion being the biggest, the oldest ideology of all.
Ideology is a parasite on religious substructures. You can't, look, we could go back to the Harry Potter example. That's a good example. I mean, J.K. Rowling had kids reading like 400-page books, right? She could fill a stadium when she was reading. Why? Is because she got the archetypes right. She got the religious sub-narratives correct. They're not ideologies. Ideologies work because an ideology is a parasite on top of a religious substructure. And a religious narrative has a particular set of characteristics. It's very balanced. So, for example, there's the feminist idea of the patriarchy. Well, the religious idea of society has a evil patriarchy built into it. That would be the dying king, the once great dying king. You see this in the Egyptian story of Osiris, for example, who was eventually chopped up by his evil brother. You see it in the Lion King with Mufasa and Simba's father and Simba's evil uncle. Those are the two representatives of the patriarchy, the wise king and the tyrannical king. In a religious story, properly set up archetypal story, there's the natural world, the chaotic world, there's a positive element and a negative element. There's the social world, there's the wise king and the tyrannical king. And there's the individual world, and that's the adversary and the hero. There's always a positive and a negative at each level. And it stops it from being an oversimplification, because it says to you, well, of course bloody society has an oppressive patriarchy. But it's also the wise father that has taught you to speak every word you know. It's like, you don't get to say only this part of the story without having gratitude for this part of the story. And it's true at each level of the representation. A properly balanced story has got the balance between positive and negative always correct.
Is that in many ways like a lot of people who are anti-Western capitalism are also the only, they will find that capitalism and Western capitalism in particular is the only culture that has embraced the acceptance of people like transgender people, people who are gay, people who are marginalized. I mean, Western capitalist society is one of the very few cultures that openly abhors racism.
Right. Well, and these people are anti-capitalist on their iPhones. Right, you don't get to do that. Right, it's a performative contradiction.
That's so important.
Yeah, they're on their iPhones while they're flying.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
while
like, well, I'm
flying.
anti-capitalist. It's like, well, actually, no, you're not. You're just deeply confused. That's what you are. Just deeply confused.
It's not capitalism that's the problem. It's evil that's the problem.
It's also it's a deeper problem. Evil is a problem. So there's a religious scholar named Mircea Eliade who looked at flood myths, because there are flood myths all over the world. God gets fed up, floods everything. It's just like in New Orleans. So here's a funny thing about New Orleans. What caused the New Orleans flood? Well, a hurricane.
No.
Yeah? No. How about human corruption? How about the corruption of the state? How about the fact that people knew the damn dikes weren't going to hold? That the levees weren't going to hold? How about that they knew that for 100 years and didn't care? How about that they pocketed the money that should have gone for their repair? And so in flood myths, you always see two things. You see that, I'm paraphrasing, say, there's a storm, there's dikes, and there's people responsible for maintaining the dikes. Well, a storm won't wipe out the city. It could. But if the dikes are high enough, then it won't. And if people aren't corrupt, then they build the dikes properly. And so God floods the world when the dikes have rotted and the people have become corrupt. And it's a very old story, and it's disseminated everywhere. And the reason is well, we inhabit a social structure that's old and dead. Our infrastructure is decayed. Our political, economic, and practical infrastructure has decayed. Well, why? It's old. Everything decays. Okay, everything's already always decaying. That's dangerous. And corrupt people don't do a very good job of keeping it in order. And so if things get old and decayed enough, and if people get corrupt enough, then God floods the world. Why? Because that's what happens. Over and over and over and over and over.
And you don't mean God in the literal sense of the word. You mean God as these are the consequences to these type of actions. You are not prepared
you could say
for what you
transcendent reality.
Ready,
You
please.
could look at it that way. You know, and I mean, the idea of God is a very, very complicated idea, but you could say,
Duncan.
if you were thinking about it
ready.
merely from an intellectual perspective, is you could say that God is what transcends your knowledge. That's all. It's what you don't know. It's what's outside of your
Come on,
knowledge.
dude.
structures.
Don't dress
There's
up.
a very
Just
old
hit
story,
ready.
and
Fuck.
this goes all the way back to the Tower of Babel, is that one of the things that characterizes
Maybe,
authoritarians
t-shirts
is that
and
there's
not the
never
jacket?
anything outside of their knowledge structures.
Maybe it's gonna
They
be
make their
cold.
knowledge structures absolute. So in the Tower of Babel, human beings build this structure that's supposed to reach all the way to heaven, so that we can invade the place of the gods. Well, God has none of that. He just blows it apart and throws people all over the world. It's a very early dramatic representation of the danger of human hubris. And the hubris is, we know everything. There's nothing that needs to be left outside of what we know. It's like, no, that's what God is. God is what's always outside of what you know.
Is the problem with the term God? Though the people think of God as being a man. They think of it being a person. They even use the masculine pronouns in reference to God. I mean, that's one of the funniest things about God is calling him a he.
Well, it's a problem. I mean, and that's certainly been a problem. Jung talked about that a lot, about the exclusion of the feminine within the domains of classic Judeo-Christian thought, for example. I mean, you have Mary, who's a kind of a quasi-deity, who pops in sort of like as a fourth member of the Trinity. But the exclusion of the feminine is definitely a conceptual problem. Is the fact that God is conceptualized as a human being or as a man a problem? It's a problem and a solution. I mean, if you remove the human element of God, then God gets so abstract that it's easy for him to float off into space and to never show up again. You lose the human connection. I mean, the way the Catholics solve that to some degree is that they have God who's sort of at the top of the hierarchy, and then they have this hierarchy of saints who are sort of like gods but half human, and then they have human beings at the bottom. And that allows for what would you say, a continual chain of communication between the highest level of abstraction and the actual, the actual concrete person. But the other thing that's useful about the conceptualization of God in anthropomorphic terms is that, and this is worth noting, is there is nothing more complex in the cosmos than a human being. So if you're looking for something to represent the ultimate in complexity, it's hard to beat a human being. So your brain is ungodly complicated, so to speak. So, I mean, these things are obviously too complicated to unpack in a
Yeah, I didn't expect us to
conversation.
even get into this conversation, but I'm glad we
yeah.
did. Do you think that these stories exist because somewhere in our code, somewhere in our very being, we understand that there is a need for this order, to find this frequency?
They're an expression of our deepest being. They're an expression of how it is that we must live in order to live.
In order to reach our full potential.
Even more than that. More than that. Even to avoid hell. And you can think of you can think about hell as Nazi Germany if you want. You can think about it as the Soviet Gulag Archipelago or Mao's Cultural Revolution. Like, we can get there, no problem. If you walk down in some of the seedier areas in LA, you'll see people in hell, no problem.
Sure, go to Skid Row.
Yes, and you can tell when those people are there because they will get angry if you look at them.
Alright guys, so
And
these two
you'll-
are about to go get something
You'll walk a
else,
big berth
so
around
I would
them. You're not going to
suggest
come
you guys
within 10 feet of
It does.
Hello?
Why are you going headfirst to a tree? Ah, okay. Whitman, have a look at the airport at this city over here. Let's make sure there's no jets spot. I see a chopper only. Never mind.
Here you go.
Yep, I see it. Leave those planes in there. That's perfect. Excellent.
Hey, how's it going?
What the hell are you guys?
Your revolution's entirely synthetic. I'm not a doctor. I just think I am. Fly low. You've got to help me, man.
Anybody home?